Okay, now we're going to go over some of the features of the reverse draw crossbows, Scorpyd crossbows. We're going to tell you, what the components are so you can familiarize yourself with the bow. These, of course, are the cams. We've got the limbs, the riser, barrel, foot stirrup, scope rail, trigger box, and your stock. We use all the best components that you can actually get for a crossbow. The titanium fasteners, what they're going to do is help lighten the bow a little bit, but most importantly, they're never going to rust on you. We've got the cams at the forward edge. We've got sealed stainless steel ball bearings, hardened stainless axles, the best quality strings and cables that you can get in a bow. We've got the vibration dampeners on the string stop bars that are attached to the foot stirrup. Proper location for the vibration dampeners on the inside of the limb. You want them as close to the cable guards as possible. We've got your scope rail and your arrow retainer. And your arrow retainer is made of glass-filled nylon that you can reset the memory in. The manual safety, ambidextrous on both sides, and the stock. We also have an integrated built-in finger guard that's built into the barrel that helps keep your fingers from getting up into the flight path of the string. Your Scorpyd crossbow comes pretty much completely assembled. The only things that you need to do after you've unpacked the bow is put the vibration dampening kit on, mount your scope, mount your quiver, and after you've familiarized yourself with the bow, read your manual, and watched the DVD, then you'll be able to go out, sight your scope in, shoot the bow. So the best way to do it is to have some type of a gun vise, crossbow vise, but a gun vise, and set the bow down in your vise. And again, this is the best, easiest way to set up the scope and then to sight it in. Okay, mounting your scope is actually pretty simple. You have to get your eye relief correct, but for most people you'll want to mount it as far forward as possible. And it's a simple matter of tightening up the rings onto the scope base. And once you've done that, you'll want to shoulder the crossbow, and if you need to adjust the scope front or back, you can do that then. Once you get the eye relief right, you'll want to look through the scope, make sure that you've got your vertical and horizontal planes correct, and then you can snug it down. The back of the scope has a focus ring, very easy to use right there, and it's also got a speed dial on it. And the speed dial is to adjust to the speed of your arrow. It is a variable power scope, 1.5 to 5, but you don't use it like a conventional scope where you would zoom in and zoom out. You adjust the speed dial to where you need it. Check your increments with actually shooting the bow. You can't just go by a trajectory chart. You have to actually shoot the bow. And once you get it fine-tuned to where the speed is correct with your increments, you leave it there. If you end up changing it later, you're going to throw off your impact points on everything but your 20-yard crosshair or your center crosshair. So once you get that set, don't touch it anymore. These are your elevation and windage turrets. Some of the scopes will have an illumination dial on them, so your reticle is illuminated. After you've mounted your scope, again, we want to go over the safety. Every segment we try to tell you this. Scorpyd crossbows have a manual safety. Manual safety always works. The crossbow needs to be in the fire position before you cock it. As soon as you get the bow cocked, reach down and put it onto safety. Never take the bow off of safety until you're ready to shoot. Don't walk around with the bow in the fire position. The shooting range. Don't walk around with it in the fire position. You cock the bow, put the safety on. Now we'll show you a little bit more in depth when we actually get to the range and shoot, but when you're sighting in your scope, it's actually very, very easy. We want you to start out at about 10 yards so you're close to your target. With your scope mounted, your bow cocked, the bow on safety, sight down through your scope and acquire your target. What you'll want to do then is kind of pull your head off to the side just a little bit and sight down the arrow and make sure that it's going to hit the target. Go back in looking through the scope, acquiring your target, and pull the trigger. Looking through your scope, you'll see where you hit. And odds are you're not going to hit right on the bullseye. But what you'll want to do is, using the windage and elevation, chase the crosshairs back to where the arrow actually hit. When you do that, you'll actually put the crosshairs right on the bullseye where you originally aimed, and then by turning your dials whichever way you need to, you'll want to chase that crosshair to where the actual point of impact was. And that's why I said it's very important if you've got a bench rest or a gun vise or something like that, because it's really, really hard to do just holding on to the bow and getting it right. And typically speaking, if you do this, you'll be able to sight your crossbow in about 3 to 4 shots on your initial point of aim, which is your 20 yard or 30 yard, depending on your speed of your crossbow. What we want you to do, once you get that acquired, back up to 20 yards and then zero in at 20 yards. If you're shooting the high-speed crossbows where you're zeroing in at 30 yards, you'll want to do that in like the second or third step. The reason we want you to do it that way is so that you're not losing arrows. If you have a smaller target, if you try shooting at 30 yards initially, you may miss the target, which means you're going to lose the arrow. Now we're going to show you the proper location to mount the quiver. On the bottom side of the foot stirrup, there's 2 tapped holes here, and that's where you put your quiver mount. Virtually any quiver will fit on here. The spacing is just like on a vertical bow sight. Now, some brackets will require that you put the provided spacer in here, and then you would put your bracket on top of that. Some brackets don't require the spacers, so you won't need them. Arrow choice is extremely critical with Scorpyd crossbows, or any high-performance crossbow for that matter. You have to shoot an arrow that is properly spined and designed for the bow that you're shooting. After that, it's extremely critical that you use the proper nock. We actually use what's called a Q nock. It snaps onto the bowstring just like on a vertical bow. And after choosing the correct nock, you have to make sure that you get it indexed correctly. If you don't have it indexed correctly, you can have what is called a partial dry fire. I have a lot of people that have inadvertently used a flat nock or a half moon nock that's not indexed correctly, and they load the crossbow, they shoot the crossbow, and the string breaks. And they swear up and down that, I had the bow loaded. Well, yes, you had the bow loaded, but it was loaded incorrectly. And that will happen with any manufacturer's crossbow. So what we want to do, make sure that the nock is indexed correctly. All of our arrows have 3 vanes on them. They come with 2 vanes of one color. The third vane is of a different color. And you need to index the opening in the nock perpendicular to the cock vane, or going side to side. Because once the bow is loaded, you'll put the cock vane down. The opening in the Q nock will be going side to side, and that's where you're going to engage the string. So once you get it loosely in place, you'll want to seat it. Just press it down hard against the table surface, and you'll have it seated in the arrow. You may need to adjust it just a little bit side to side to get it properly indexed, but those are very, very critical steps in making sure that you have proper operation of your crossbow. Even though the bow is not cocked, we're going to show you the proper procedure for loading the arrow, and we'll also demonstrate it later with the bow cocked. But you'll want to get the cock vane down in the channel. You'll want to get the nock started underneath the arrow retainer, and you usually will do this at a little bit of an angle, and slide it back in, and you'll slide it all the way back until it stops, and you'll probably hear a little bit of a click, or you'll feel a little bit of just a little bit extra force there. What that is the Q nock actually engaging with the bowstring. and then your arrow will be seated. Your Scorpyd crossbow is going to come with one of two cocking units standard, and you get your choice of which one you want. We have what we call the short sled direct pull unit, which is the quickest, easiest way to do it so long as you can deadlift the draw weight of the bow. And we'll show you how to use that later. The other one is the rope cocker. This one operates with a pulley effect where it cuts the draw weight in half, and it comes in a kit, and I'll show you how to assemble it. You get two handles, a length of rope, and your cocking sled. Now what you'll want to do is take one end of the rope, feed it behind the pulleys on the cocking sled, just like that. Pick up one of the T-handles, and from the bottom side you'll feed through one of the ends of the rope, and then you'll tie a knot in the end of it, and you'll want to leave about an inch of the rope sticking out beyond the knot. Snug the knot down really good, and then seat that knot into the T-handle like that, so it's buried in there. Then you'll do the same thing on the other end. Tie your knot, leave about an inch, and then bury it into the T-handle. Now, the rope is long enough to where it will essentially reach out, grab the bowstring, and come back and be at rest. A lot of people will want to preload to make the distance that they're actually pulling the rope cocker less, and we'll show you how to do that a little bit later. But that's all there is to assembling your rope cocker. On some of the Scorpyd models, we have the AccuDraw crank cocking unit. It's very easy to use, but there are a few critical steps that we want you to realize before you actually start using it. First and foremost, you can't use a standard AccuDraw on Scorpyd crossbows. And one thing that we have done is we've actually made our cocking sled red instead of the standard black. The standard black one that's available from the manufacturer does not work on Scorpyd's trigger housing. So you can't take just a regular AccuDraw and put it on a Scorpyd. The AccuDraw unit has to come from Scorpyd. We want you to do a dry run, and what I mean by that is don't actually hook this onto the bowstring. Just set it up in front, and we want you to understand how the mechanism actually works, how far back it's supposed to come and everything before you actually get the unit under pressure. There's a little lever on the back side here, as you'll see in your operations manual, that will either allow the spool to go freely or to lock it. You'll want it in the free mode right now, which, as you can see, it automatically retracts. You'll take the unit, set it up in front of the scope and scope rail, and you'll want to get it under the arrow retainer. And it automatically comes back. The nose of the sled is actually designed to mesh with the nose of the trigger housing. The angles line up, so it actually stops. So once you get the bow back to that point, do not over crank it. If you over crank it, you can damage the cranking assembly, the trigger housing, the sled, possibly break the string. You need to be careful and pay attention when you're doing this. So that you'll see roughly how far back it comes. Take it out. When you get done using the unit, it will actually park right here. This little lever with a notch in it, it will actually park right in there. So what you want to do when you're getting ready to cock the bow is you'll take the sled unit, you'll go up and grab the string. Now you reach back and you'll flip the lever, which will prevent it from actually going backwards. You take your crank handle and insert it in the opening on the side, and you start cranking. When you're doing this, you can see that the sled is starting to pull back the bowstring. And again, you'll crank this all the way back till the unit comes in, You'll hear the trigger mechanism cycle. As soon as it has done so, reach down, put your safety on. You'll know that the bow is cocked if the safety will go on. If the safety will not go on, you don't have it cocked quite far enough. Once the bow is cocked, again, you'll take the sled out like we previously showed you and put it in the park position.